Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Welcome to episode 66 of the Feeling Good podcast. We're going to continue delving into the 5 secrets, and we still have Dr. Helen Yenikomshin with us. So you're going to be in for a treat.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Helen.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Fabrice.
Hello, David. Hello.
Where are we, Fabrice?
In the Murrieta studios.
Okay, we're going to erase all that.
No, it's good. It's just, we're human, right? Why do we have to
We just left half of our audience again.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about the first of the 5 secrets today, the most challenging and most fantastic, really, of the 5 secrets, the disarming technique. It's very hard to learn, but if you're humble and willing to learn it, it can change your life. It was really a life changer for me, to be honest. And again, what is the disarming technique, Helen?
The disarming technique is finding some truth in what the other person is saying, even if it seems totally unreasonable or unfair.
Right, and it's based...
Okay, so let me stop you here.
Okay.
What if it is unreasonable and unfair?
Well, then you want to see the truth in it. And once you acknowledge the truth in the criticism, the person will stop believing it. And this is best illustrated through examples, because you'll almost always think the other person's criticism is totally untrue and unfair. And I can give a pretty dramatic example of that in my own clinical work. And then I think you have a good family one if you dare to share it. The idea behind the disarming technique is that when people attack us, we think what they're saying is untrue and unfair, and so we defend ourselves. And everyone listening to the broadcast does this, and has probably done it 1,000 times with friends and family members. You get irritated and defensive, and you argue, and then the problem escalates. And the more you argue, the more the other person believes that what they're saying is true. Now, let me just disguise identities here a little bit. I treated a young woman we'll call Janice, who was an immigrant from Europe and had gotten citizenship here, and was asking for treatment for severe depression, and she also had what's called borderline personality disorder, which is, for listeners who aren't familiar with it, it's a particularly severe form of depression where a person is depressed pretty much every minute of every day. It often comes on in adolescence, and sometimes there's a history of abuse, and sometimes these individuals do self-mutilation with razor blades, or they burn themselves with cigarettes as an escape from the emotional pain they're feeling.
And they also have strong oscillation of their moods.
Yeah, and a intense fear of abandonment and anger. And it's not always severe. It can be on a spectrum, but it certainly can be severe.
And they often, in my experience, make great demands on the therapist. And typically the therapist will try hard to please them. And whatever the therapist does, it's never good enough. And I've often said it's, in the early days, I used to say I feel like I'm a dog and the patient is holding the hoop up and saying, jump through the hoop. And then you jump through the hoop and the patient says, well, that wasn't any good, and holds it up higher. And no matter what you do, it isn't good enough. And so this woman, Janice, I don't think I'd ever worked harder for a patient or given more of myself, but she was very demanding, and she tended to blame everyone else for her problems. And once during a therapy session, she looked at me and she says, "Dr. Burns, I just want you to know that this is worse than the incest and abuse I endured as a child, that your therapy is worse than that." And I just wanted to kill her. It was so painful for me, and I was so angry. And I was thinking to myself, I've given so much to you, and you never appreciate anything I do, and you never are accountable. You never look at your own role in the problems. You're always blaming someone else. But I didn't say much. I just didn't allow myself to, lash out at her, which would have been very unprofessional. But that's how I was feeling, and I kind of stumbled along to the end of the session. And then that weekend, I used to jog around a certain college. There was a trail, and it was a 2-mile trail, and I'd go around twice, sometimes with a friend, and we'd talk difficult cases, and my colleague couldn't come, and so I was just thinking about her on my own, and I was telling myself, well, why don't you find some truth in what she's saying? And then I would tell myself, there is no truth in what she's saying. She's just blaming other people, and you've given everything to her, and she's just totally out to lunch. And that's how all of us feel. The listeners, we all feel this way when we feel unfairly attacked. And then I told myself, no, David, there must be some truth in what she was saying. You should figure it out, that she was trying to tell you something that's true. And then I said, no, there's no truth in it. And I kept going back and forth, and suddenly hit me like lightning, and I saw what I think she'd been trying to tell me. And it was kind of like a shock to my system. And when I saw her the next session, I said, Janice, when you told me that the therapy that I've been doing with you is worse than the incest and abuse you endured as a child. And by the way, when she told her parents, they never believed her. So she never got any resolution or satisfaction.
Or any emotional validation.
Yeah.
Or help.
Absolutely. And so I said I was so mad, to tell you the truth, I wanted to wring your neck. I was enraged, and I felt you were entirely wrong and being unfair to me. And then I jogged, around such and such college, and suddenly dawned on me, I think, what you were trying to tell me. And I think you were trying to tell me, like, when you were little and you were exploited by older people, older men who were using you, and that in the therapy, I've been trying to kind of use you to use my techniques, get you to do my techniques. I've been using you for my own purposes of my own ego, rather than hearing your suffering and providing the warmth and compassion that you need. And that's what you were trying to tell me, I think. And I want you to know, when I realized that, I felt a tremendous feeling of shame, and saw that's actually right. I've been pushing you to do the homework and to use these techniques, and I haven't really been listening and hearing your suffering and the anger and the desperation and the hopelessness that you've been feeling. And I just wonder, if I got it right, if that's what you were trying to tell me. And then she just began sobbing uncontrollably, and all this pain came out, and she later said that was the moment that changed her life, because finally someone was listening. Mm-hmm. And the moment I agreed that I had been failing her, in that moment I became successful. I made a connection with her. My failure was her first success.
So can you talk more about the process you went through to really find, a lot of times it's hard to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes.
Yeah.
And if on top of that, what they say seems completely incongruous to us, how do you get to finding that?
Well, you have to want it, first of all, and the problem is that you might not want it. You might prefer to be defensive and be in the victim role and blame the other person and keep arguing. That's what most humans do most of the time. But in this case, I had a strong desire to have a breakthrough with her, and to set my ego aside But the desire comes first, and it takes a lot of practice. When I first practiced with the disarming technique after I invented it, I spent 2 months practicing it, 30 minutes every day. And I would say, what is some impossible criticism a patient could say to me that I couldn't possibly agree with because it's so preposterous? And then I would work on it until I could figure out what was true about it. Anyway, that was a clinical example, and I could give dozens of them, but the bottom line is when you agree with someone who's being critical of you, it transforms the interaction, and they'll typically stop believing the criticism. Helen, you were mentioning a personal relationship, family type example of that.
Yes, I can definitely share that. But just to comment on Janice, that you could imagine that Janice was obviously hurting a lot, and she was quite hurtful to you in her statement that you were worse than her years of incest and so on. So you could imagine if she was bringing that anger into other relationships in her life, that she was pushing people away, and probably didn't have a whole lot of people who wanted to get close to her. And because you were able to disarm her and use thought and feeling, empathy, and I feel statements and stroking, and rather than running from her, try to connect with her, it was a very powerful experience for her.
Right, and we'll come to your family example in a minute, because everyone who's listening isn't a therapist, but I think the general principle is important, that when people are criticizing us, when our patients are criticizing us, you can say they're trying to kill us. She was trying to kill me. She took the worst blow that she could think of, and the question is, for therapists, do you have the courage to die for your patients? Mm-hmm. Because my ego had to die in order to see the truth of what she was saying. And then the odd thing is that when you let your ego die, when you're under attack from a loved one or from a patient, you see the world through their eyes with warmth and compassion and vulnerability. In most instances, their ego will suddenly die too, and then you'll be connected with them. Their defenses will also go down, and that's what happened in this case and so many other cases. And yet there's always a voice in me saying, David, you shouldn't have to do that. You're right. The other person is wrong, and they better admit that they're wrong. And if you give in to that, then the relationship will generally just pretty much, tensions will escalate, and the relationship will sometimes fall apart. But give us your cool example.
Well, that's a good segue, I would say. So this is a more kind of a day-to-day trivial example, but so when I'm driving with my husband and kids, usually my husband will be the driver, and he will tend to notice bad drivers. So he'll say things like, oh, did you see how fast that guy was going? Or look, they ran the stop sign, or, they just cut me off, or pointing out
Does he get angry too?
Not terribly angry. Not to begin with, actually. He doesn't. But I actually do something that makes him angry, which is rather than disarming. And even though I know the 5 secrets inside and out and teach them to people, when we're in our own personal situations, it can, be hard to decide.
Hard to practice what you preach.
Hard to practice what you preach. And so I think I usually am operating under some negative thoughts, like he shouldn't comment on other people's driving. We should just sort of let those things go and not voice what he's noticing. And so I get a little ticked off, and I'll say something like, why did you say that? Or, do you have to say that? Or say, that wasn't that bad, or I thought they did stop at the stop sign, or basically something that is invalidating. And then predictably, you could imagine that doesn't help and actually makes things worse, and will turn into a kind of like bit of a back and forth. And somehow I can't seem to resist doing that over and over. And it really was brought home to me one time when I happened to be driving with my husband and my mom, and my husband made some comment like, "Oh, did you see how that person," I don't even remember what it was, but like, let's just make it up, ran through the stop sign. And my mom said, "Yeah, I hate it when people do that. I feel like blasting the horn at them." Mm-hmm. And it instantly diffused the situation. And it just became so obvious to me in that moment that because she disarmed him and found truth in what he was saying, it was sort of like that was the end of it. And my constant going back and saying, "Oh, well, why'd you say that? You shouldn't have said that." That just, made things worse.
That's awesome.
Well, it's a great personal example, but I have a question, which is, since you know the 5 secrets inside and out, mm-hmm. what stops you from doing it in that very personal event in your life?
I think it's just those negative thoughts that he shouldn't say that. That just an idea about how people should behave, according to my wishes. And so I think that's really
so you hang on to your righteousness.
Yeah, exactly.
It's better for you in the moment than it is to diffuse the situation.
Right. Mm-hmm. But I'm getting better. Let's put that out there.
And we get rewarded by blaming others, by telling ourselves, "I'm right and you're wrong." And I think there's a basic human biological drive toward conflict and aggression, and I think it's in all of us, and it's very, very, very tempting. Just like our cats, when they go outside, what they want to do the most. You have 2 cats. I posted them on the website. They're the mm-hmm. cutest little cats in the world, and I'm sure they've had nothing but love and the best of everything a cat could hope for. But what do they want to do more than anything else? Go out in the backyard, capture a little mouse, and torture it to death. And that's a basic, biological drive. And I think we have this biological drive toward aggression and arguing and defeating the other person. And that's what you're swimming upstream when you're trying to learn the 5 secrets. And that's, I think, why religious leaders and Buddha and have been, to my way of thinking, pretty unsuccessful at modifying human behavior. You write about it in the Bible, and you have all these truths that you teach children, and yet when it comes down to an actual conflict, we want to lash out at the other person and defend ourselves and prove that we're right. And so
we were just talking about how we had learned that self-righteous anger is a very rewarding state neurologically. So we're wired for that, perhaps.
Absolutely. So let's practice the disarming technique, and then we'll have a kind of some homework for the folks who are listening if you'd like to learn this powerful method. Just to dangle the carrot a little bit, I would say it's been one of the greatest things in my life, in my career as a psychiatrist, and in my personal life as well. And it involved a lot of work for me. And I don't always succeed. Sometimes I give in to those dark forces to argue and get defensive, but it has helped me tremendously in my interaction with family, with colleagues, and with patients as well. Okay, so let's go back and give a couple specific examples so the listeners can see that we're focusing on how to do the disarming technique and what happens when you don't do the disarming technique, and let's give practical examples of the law of opposites. You were telling me a really interesting example about a young Japanese woman who you treated recently, who was a teenager struggling with depression, and you were trying to give the mother some coaching. Tell us about what was going on there.
Yeah, so I was seeing the mother who had a teenage daughter who was suffering from depression, and the daughter had to take a leave from school and was in an outpatient hospital program and really struggling.
This is Sarah.
Sarah. And the mother took a leave from work to help her daughter and was making all kinds of phone calls to the school to try to help her daughter make up missed work, and lots of arranging for the daughter's medical care, and really working hard on her daughter's behalf and really worried about her daughter. And yet the mother and daughter were butting heads quite a bit. And so we decided to take a look at exactly what was going on in some of their interactions. And so one typical interaction that happened was the daughter would say something like, "You don't care about me." And when I asked what the mom would say in response, she would say something like, "We do care." And then she would just explain herself why she had needed to set some limit. For example, we just can't let you use your phone 24 hours a day.
Now, before we go on with this really great story, let's just pause and talk about the law of opposites. Now, what that mother did is what 99% of our listeners do 99% of the time. If you're a therapist and a patient attacks you, you make a statement like that. "No, I do care about you." Or when your family member says that. But what will the daughter conclude when the mother responds like this? The daughter says, "You don't care about me," and the mother says, "Oh, we do care about you. We're doing all these things for you." What will the daughter conclude? How will the daughter feel?
The daughter will not feel understood at all and will conclude that the mom doesn't care about her.
And let's just spell that out at the 4th grade level. Why is it when you defend yourself from a criticism like this, the person becomes even more convinced that what they're saying is true?
Because they haven't had their experience validated. So the daughter doesn't feel cared about, and if the mother is insisting that we do care about you, the daughter will feel even more rejected and alone and misunderstood.
Because who's the mother talking about? We do care about you, sweetheart.
She's talking about herself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So that's more
right.
proof. Do you see? When you defend yourself from a criticism, you prove that the criticism is valid. It's a subtle thing to see, but you can see it so plainly here. "Oh, yes, sweetheart, I do care about you. I'm a wonderful human being, and you're so lucky to have me as a mother." Do you see? It's all this narcissistic self-defense stuff, which doesn't do anything to touch the daughter, her suffering, her sadness, her anger. Just a distancing, argumentative response. And I don't mean to be overly critical, because the mother doesn't think about it like that, and she's trying to be loving. But yet that's the law of opposite. When you defend yourself from a criticism that feels unfair and untrue, and you defend yourself, you'll prove that the criticism is valid. Now let's hear the other side of it.
Yeah, and so you can imagine, though, why it would be so hard for the mother to disarm. And remember, the definition of disarming is to find some truth in what the other person is saying. And if the daughter is saying, "You don't care about me," but meanwhile the mother has had to take a leave from work and is running herself ragged trying to arrange things for her daughter, and the mother's doing all of this out of love, it's very hard for the mother to find truth in what the daughter is saying, because it does feel false. But in fact, when she doesn't disarm, it just makes things worse, like you've said. So we, the mother and I, kind of worked on what she might say instead to actually disarm the daughter. And maybe why don't we just have you be the daughter for a moment, David,
Sure.
and you say,
"Yeah, well, you don't care about me."
"Yeah, honey, you're right. Your dad and I haven't been showing you care, and we've been putting limits on how much you use your phone, and that's been restricting your ability to connect with your friends. And we haven't been understanding how you're feeling, and we've just been fighting. And it makes me so sad that we're fighting this much, and I can imagine that you're feeling angry with us and maybe hurt too. And even though I do get frustrated when we're fighting as much as we've been fighting, I love you so much, and I really do want to understand how you're feeling. Can you tell me more how you are feeling?"
Yeah, and I'd have to give you real high marks on that, because as the daughter, then paradoxically, I would feel cared about when you acknowledge that you're sometimes angry and that you haven't tuned into my feelings, and it would just Can you explain that a little bit, Fabrice?
Well, when you're telling to the daughter that yes, it's true, I've not been the best mother. It's like, oh, she's joining me where I am at.
Yeah. So when you admit your failure, you suddenly succeed.
Yeah.
And that's also the death of the ego. And when your ego dies, you are reborn, because the rebirth is the relation. Then you have that loving relationship with your daughter, who finally feels cared about and understood. Let's just give just a couple little one-liner examples of the disarming technique, and then I have a homework assignment for the folks who are listening, and a little vignette to introduce the homework assignment. But this is something I sometimes do in workshops, and it might work here. I'll be David, and you can give me some impossibly outrageous criticism, and it'll be my challenge to see if I can disarm you and make a statement that's entirely true. So you have to say something, horrendously humiliating and insulting. And
who do you want us to be?
This will be fun, right? You can be yourself.
Friends.
Yeah, you can be some kind of, angry colleague or something like
we
that.
could be an angry podcast listener.
Yeah, or anything.
This podcast is terrible.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, we've cut out 2 sections already. That sucks. And I hope it'll be up to speed and have some value. But I had that same thought about 16 times since we started this podcast. So how did I do?
That was awesome.
Yeah, that looks, yes.
Right.
I'm feeling ashamed right now of being on this very podcast.
but see, if you let your ego die, you don't have anything to be afraid of. Do you want to try it again, or do a role reversal?
Well, but the thing is, David, you're just a narcissist, and you can't even bear to be contradicted, because you're going to be shooting down everyone who does.
I'm surprised it took you this many podcasts to figure that out about me and my narcissism. I wouldn't say it's my worst fault, because I have others that are worse, but it's one of my worst faults. And a lot of times when I get myself into trouble, it's because I let my narcissism take over. And I totally agree with you. And I'm so narcissistic that right now I'm not even feeling ashamed of myself.
It's going to be great.
Now here's your assignment. If you want to learn the 5 secrets, and if you want to take a crack at changing your life, maybe that sounds too grandiose, but that's, for me, learning this really changed my life and changed my career. That your assignment is to find things to agree with. Let's say every day, try to agree with 5 different people. Now, they maybe aren't criticizing you. It could be just go into a grocery store and the person checking your groceries says something like, "Oh, it's raining outside," or it's a gloomy day, and you just agree with them. Say, yeah, we got some real rain, and it is kind of gloomy outside. Just something as trivial as that. But get used to saying, you're right. I agree with you. I'll give you one last quick example.
And by the way, if people do this, it'd be great if they could leave a comment in the show notes, so we know what happened. What did they discover?
Yeah, so we'll have some fun things to talk about on the next podcast.
Yeah.
That's a great idea, Fabrice. I agree with you.
Oh, really?
So I was commuting home in Philadelphia in the summer. It was a real hot day, and the commuter trains were kind of screwed up, so they were late, and everybody was piling into this train, and the air conditioning didn't work in the train, and people were packed in, not only in the seats, but totally in the aisles. So there wasn't really even room for one more person to get on, and I was squashed there in the aisle. But I saw this little kind of a half a thing seat on the end, little area. So I said, I'm going to sit down there. I'm so tired. And the man next to me was in a real sour mood, and he started whining and complaining, real angrily, complain. And I think secretly he was letting me know he was pissed off that I had sat down next to him in this crowded, sweaty, hot train without the air conditioning. So I just decided as a little experiment to use the disarming technique. So whatever he said, I just totally agreed with him. I said, you're right. They're not managing these trains well at all. And air conditioning doesn't work. Everyone's packed in here. I'm sitting down, squashed up against you. You're probably feeling really squashed and irritated. And we're on the same page. These trains don't seem to be managed very well. And then he gave some other complaint, and I agreed with him again. And he said something about the Mideast. There's problems in the Mideast, and all these countries are fighting against each other. It's also irrational. And then I agreed with them again, and they started to just open up. And by the time we got to Bryn Mawr, which was 12 minutes later, I think he thought I was his best friend in the whole world. He poured out his heart to me, and we became this very friendly fellow. And he was probably a grumpy guy who was complaining all the time, and then people get annoyed with him and argue with him or dismiss him. And the fact that I just gave him some respect and found truth in what he was saying, it just kind of made his day. But it's also a Buddhist idea or a Christian idea or a Jewish idea or whatever religion you have. I'm sure it's at the core of your religion that when you help another person, you're helping yourself, like that we are one, the universe is one. And the fact is I made him feel really happy, and then that made me feel really happy rather than getting into some argument with some ornery fellow on a train. So see if you can agree. If you want to learn this. Now, if you don't want to, if it doesn't appeal, if you don't want to resolve the conflicts with people in your lives, then you don't have to do the homework. But if you want to change your life, this week, try to agree with 5 things that people say every day. And again, it's you're right, and then you agree with them. That's the simple formula here. And also, remember, if you want to get a deeper look at this and get written practice as well and better explanations, pick up my book, Feeling Good Together, because it's both for therapists and for the general public. And there's a chapter on each of the 5 secrets and written exercises for you in there as well.
Yeah, that's really the manual for what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
One of the things I think you can learn, how you can learn these things, is also how it feels when people do or don't use things like the disarming technique on you. So sometimes you might be the person who's complaining or upset, and you'll have your own real life learning when you see how people respond to you, and can notice how wonderful it feels when somebody uses disarming and finds truth in what you're saying rather than arguing or criticizing you or telling you not to feel that way.
Absolutely. And I can think of things, I can't bring specifics to mention, but even in the last couple of weeks, I think I've called up to complain about something in a hotel reservation or something. I was just really angry and ticked off, and then the other person said, you have every right to feel that way, and clearly you're right, and what you're saying, all of a sudden, wow, this is the most wonderful person in the world, I think I'm in love.
Yeah.
And all my anger suddenly disappeared. One last thing is that there's common errors that people make in the disarming technique, and let's just mention what those are. One is that you have to genuinely agree with the person, and Fabrice is giving me 10 seconds here. So so making a statement like, I can see how you might feel that way, is not genuine disarming. That's a kind of a put down, and also, you may just not be able to see the truth in what the person is saying. If so, talk with a family member or a colleague and say, can you see some truth in what this person is saying? Or write to us and send me an email, and we'll help you figure it out. So I will shut up at this point. Fabrice giving me that one finger flag there, middle finger signal.
No, he's not.
You're giving our listeners the wrong impression.
Yeah, he
and
was
here's
not
a
doing
witness that did not happen.
Thank you, Fabrice.
Well,
thank you, Helen, for
Thank
joining
you.
us. And we really appreciate your being a part of the Feeling Good podcast team today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, see you next week.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.